Welcome to Communicate to Lead, the podcast that empowers leaders and aspiring leaders to communicate with clarity and impact. I'm Kele CEO and successful entrepreneur, and your host for today. I'm here to equip you with all the essential tools and strategies to master effective communication and lead your team to success. As the founder and CEO of The Tailored Approach, my goal is to empower you to be the best leader you can be. So sit back, relax, and join me in today's episode as we dive into the art of communicating like a true leader.
There's a version of you at the end of December who's either going to be grateful for what you did in August or wish you could go back and change it. This is not a scare tactic. That's the math of promotion cycles, of compensation conversations, of year-end decisions that get made in October and November about people whose names got planted in August. Most of the women I coach don't think of August that way. August feels quiet. It feels like a hold your breath month before September, before Q4, before the year rushes to its end. And that quiet is exactly why it's the most important month of your year. Because the leaders who move up in Q4 aren't the leaders who hustle harder in October. They are the leaders who did 4 things in August that changed the story their manager was telling about them. And those 4 things start with 4 questions. That is what this episode is about. Welcome back to Communicate to Lead. I'm Kele Belton, and this is your Thursday deep dive, my friend. Today, I'm walking you through what I call the Mid-Year Audit, which is a set of 4 coaching questions I use in every leadership strategy call I run in August with clients preparing for Q4. These aren't the questions your manager will ask you. They are the questions I will ask you because they are the ones your manager can't ask and the ones you rarely ask yourself. If you're the kind of leader who ended July telling yourself the second half of the year is going to be different, this episode is for you. If you felt the ambient drift of summer and you're ready to come back into your work with intention, this episode is for you. If you've been thinking about what a Q4 promotion or compensation conversation would sound like, and you want to know what to do in August to make that conversation possible, this episode is definitely for you. Let me name something you already sense but might not have language for. The mid-year review conversation you had with your manager in May or June wasn't a mid-year audit. It was a mid-year check-in on the work your manager could already see. It covered what you delivered, what's on track, and what needs adjustment. It was useful, but it wasn't enough. If you want the playbook for making that review conversation itself work harder for you, go back and listen to episode 110, which is called How to Turn Your Mid-Year Review into Career Advancement. That episode is about the conversation with your manager. This episode is about the conversation you have with yourself before or after that meeting, when the review left you with more questions than answers, because we both know that sometimes happens. Here's what a mid-year review audit is instead. It's the private conversation you have with yourself about the things your manager can't see, the places where your own patterns are working against you, and the specific conversations you've been avoiding that are going to compound into a much bigger problem by December if you keep avoiding them. In coaching, this is where the real work happens. Not in the review meetings, but in the questions the leader hasn't yet asked herself. And August is when the audit matters most because you still have time to act on what you find. If you do the audit in October, you're already inside the compression of Q4 and you can't change a whole lot. If you do it in August, you have 3-4 months to change what needs changing. Here's the pattern I see in high-performing women leaders. You are so focused on delivering that you don't stop to ask whether the delivery is being seen. You are so focused on being reliable that you don't notice when reliability has become a ceiling. You're so used to solving problems that you can't recognize the problems that are now yours to name, not solve. The 4 questions I'm about to walk you through are the ones I use to interrupt those patterns. Take out a notebook or open a document or listen and come back to them. But I encourage you to do them because thinking through these questions once will do more for your Q4 than any amount of working harder in September. Let me walk you through the 4 questions. Here is question 1. What have you accomplished that your manager doesn't know about? The first question is the one that almost always surprises my clients because they think the answer is going to be a short list. It's almost never a short list. Here's the question again. What have you accomplished this year that your manager doesn't know about? Not what you accomplished. What you accomplished that your manager doesn't know about. Most high-performing women in middle and senior management are carrying an invisible ledger of wins. Problems you diffused before they surfaced. Relationships you rebuilt after someone else damaged them. Junior team members you developed into contributors. Cross-functional favors you called in to unblock a project. Difficult decisions you made in the moment that saved someone else's timeline. None of that is on your performance review. None of that is in your one-on-one notes. Your manager knows the outputs. Your manager doesn't know the effort, the judgment, or the strategic trade-offs it took to produce them. Here's a story that illustrates why this matters. A director I worked with, I'll call her Tanya, came into a coaching session convinced she was underperforming. Her actual language was, I don't feel like I've done that much this year. So I asked her to spend 20 minutes making a list, get it out of her head and onto paper. And she came back with 3 pages. 3 pages. There was the time she quietly renegotiated a vendor contract that saved her department 6 figures. There was the mentee she coached through a promotion. There were 4 meetings she de-escalated before her VP had to hear about them. And there was the presentation she rebuilt from scratch for a peer whose delivery would have embarrassed the entire team. None of those things were on her mid-year review. Not one of those things had been mentioned in a one-on-one. And she had gotten so used to doing them that she had stopped counting them as work. Here's what you do with the answer to this question. You don't walk into your manager's office next Tuesday and read the list out loud. That isn't what this is for. What you do instead is name the pattern in the list. You're going to see a category of work you've been doing consistently that hasn't been named. And then you find one strategic way to make that category visible. For Tanya, the pattern was cost savings and vendor management. So the next week in her one-on-one, she said this, I've been doing a lot of vendor renegotiation this year, and I haven't really surfaced it with you. In the last 6 months, I've saved us around 6 figures across 3 contracts. I want to talk about whether that should be part of my official role for Q4 and beyond. That's the audit becoming action. If this question surfaced more than you expected and you want the deeper frame for why high performers keep hitting invisible ceilings, episode 112 of this podcast, Why Hard Work Won't Get You Promoted, is the strategic companion to this audit question. Question 1. This episode 112, it unpacks the 5 areas where promotions are actually won or lost, and it explains why your excellent performance reviews haven't been translating into advancement. Pair it with your answers to question 1, and you'll see the pattern clearly. So take a moment right now, wherever you are, and think about your list. What have you done this year that hasn't been counted? What categories does it fall into? That category is the one thing you're going to name in August. Let's move on to question 2. Question 2 is, where have you been playing small? And this is probably one of the hardest questions to sit with because playing small isn't what most people think it is. Playing small isn't being timid or being quiet. Some of the loudest leaders I know are playing small in ways they can't even see. Playing small is any pattern where you're keeping yourself in a lane that is narrower than what you're capable of, because staying in the narrower lane feels safer. It's the meeting where you have the sharpest read on the situation, and yet you let someone else say that. It's the initiative you almost volunteered for, and then you held yourself back because you thought someone else was better suited for it. It might be the strategic opinion you've been forming for months about your organization's direction, and you haven't shared it with anyone senior enough to do something about it. It could be the LinkedIn post you almost wrote and didn't publish, or it's the conference talk where you qualified to submit and you didn't. It could be the role you almost applied for and then you talked yourself out of it. Here's why this question matters in August specifically. Q4 is where you get chosen or not chosen. The women who get chosen aren't always the most qualified. They are the ones whose contributions have been most visible, whose ambition has been most legible, whose strategic voice has been most present in the rooms where decisions are getting made. If you've been playing small this year, that's where the perception gap is coming from, and you still have time to close it. I work with a senior manager in financial services who I'll call Priya. She kept getting the same feedback in her reviews. High performer, needs more executive presence. She'd been told this for 2 years straight, and not one person had ever told her what it actually meant. Here's the problem with that feedback that she received. Executive presence isn't one thing. When a leader tells you that you need more executive presence, it could mean at least 4 different things. They could mean you aren't participating enough. They could mean you participate, but you hedge, you over-explain, you soften everything before you say it. It could mean you stay tactical when the room needs you to be strategic. Or they could mean you come apart when the pressure gets too high. 4 different problems, 4 completely different fixes. And if you don't know which one you're being told, you can't do anything with the feedback except carry it around, which is exactly what Priya had been doing for 2 full years. So the first thing we did in coaching was decode it. I didn't ask her how she felt in senior management meetings. I asked her what actually happens in those meetings. The answer was almost nothing. I asked her when she'd last shared a strategic opinion in a senior meeting, and she couldn't remember. She had a lot of opinions. She had them daily. She had refined analysis of her organization's strategic direction that she had never once said out loud in a meeting or a room that mattered. So Priya's version of the presence problem wasn't polish, it was participation. Her leaders weren't reacting to how she came across when she spoke. They were reacting to the fact that she almost never said anything. And here's the distinction that matters, because almost nobody makes it. Presence is partly about how you come across in a conversation, and it's also about whether you are in the conversation at all. Those are 2 very different problems. Priya had the second one. There was nothing for her leaders to read except her silence. That's playing small. And her leadership team was reading it not as caution, but as absence. They were watching her not show up and drawing conclusions about what she could handle and not handle. Once she named the pattern, the fix wasn't complicated. She started bringing 1 strategic point of view to every senior meeting she attended. Not 5, 1. She prepared it the day before. She waited for the right moment, and she shared her 1 strategic view. And within 2 months, her VP started referring to her as the person to talk to on a specific strategic area. Here's what you do with your answers to this question. Name 1 area where you've been playing small, 1, not a list, and then ask yourself what the smallest version of not playing small looks like in the next 30 days. Not the biggest version, the smallest one that would still count. If you've been playing small in senior meetings, the smallest version is 1 strategic point of view brought to 1 meeting this month. If you've been playing small on your organization's direction, the smallest version is 1 paragraph in an email to 1 leader who would benefit from hearing your thinking. And if you've been playing small on visibility, the smallest version is 1 post, 1 comment, 1 nomination for a panel. So small enough that you can't talk yourself out of it, but consistent enough that it starts to compound. That's question 2. Here is question 3. What have you outgrown? The third question is where the audit gets really uncomfortable, and I know this. But again, the question is, what have you outgrown? Not what have you mastered? What have you outgrown? Outgrown is a specific word. It means something that used to fit but doesn't fit anymore. It isn't that you're done with it. It's that it's now beneath what you should be spending your energy on. Here's where high-performing women get stuck. You don't outgrow tasks the way you should because you're good at them and they still get done while you do them. So you keep doing them and you keep doing them. And your ceiling stays exactly where it is because the work that would raise your ceiling is the work you don't have time for. Let me give you a concrete example. A senior manager in tech, I'll call her Amina, came into coaching frustrated that her manager kept saying she was ready for the next level without actually promoting her. When I asked her what her weeks looked like, 70% of her time was doing the work that a strong senior IC on her team could handle. She was still writing the specs herself. She was still owning the vendor conversations. She was still the person who put together the quarterly review deck. None of that was her level of work anymore. All of it was work she'd outgrown 2 years earlier. but she was still doing it because she was good at it, because it was familiar, and because letting go of that felt scary. Here's the reframe I gave her. Every hour you spend on work you've outgrown is an hour you're not spending on work that would demonstrate that you are ready for what comes next. The work that would demonstrate that strategic, cross-functional, executive-facing, and requires you to be visible in rooms you are not in. If you're still doing the work you have outgrown, your leadership isn't going to see the work you are ready for. So the question isn't, what are you doing that's beneath you? The question is, what have you outgrown that you are still doing because it's comfortable? The answer might be a category of tasks. It might be a specific project. It might be a relationship pattern where you're still solving someone else's problem. It might be a role you've functionally outgrown but not yet renegotiated. Whatever it is, the audit surfaces that. What you do with it in August is to start the 2 conversations required to hand it off. One conversation with your manager about what you should be doing instead, and another conversation with whoever will absorb what you're handing off. Those 2 conversations take 3 weeks to schedule and 30 minutes each to have, and they could change what your Q4 looks like. That was question 3. So here's question 4. What conversation have you been avoiding? And I know this 4th question is one no one likes and the one that probably changes things the most. So here it is again. What conversation have you been avoiding? Not what conversation would be nice to have. Not one conversation you keep meaning to schedule, but really, what conversation have you been actively, if not consciously, avoiding? Almost every high-performing woman I work with has one, sometimes 2, and they're almost always the same shape. It's the conversation with your manager about your career trajectory that you've been meaning to have since March. It's the conversation with a peer whose behavior in cross-functional meetings is undermining you and you have been telling yourself it doesn't matter or it's unimportant. It might be the conversation with a direct report whose performance isn't where it needs to be and you have been coaching around it instead of clearly naming it. It could even be the conversation with your skip level manager who doesn't know your work well enough. And you keep thinking you'll get to that conversation once you've accomplished one more thing worth showing them. It might even be the conversation with yourself about whether the role you are in today is still the role that you should be in. A specific note for the leader who's avoiding conversation is with a manager who has quietly checked out. If you're asking for feedback from your manager and getting generic responses, bringing up development and hearing we should talk about this, but there is no follow through, that's one of the most common patterns I see, and it deserves its own strategy. So go check out episode 113 of this podcast called 4 Strategies to Advance Your Career When Your Manager Has Checked Out. That episode is the tactical playbook for that exact situation, and I will link to it in the show notes. So go grab it in the show notes. Do the audit first, then use that episode to build the response. Here's what you need to understand about avoiding conversations. They don't stay static. They compound. They become more and more, and then they just roller coasters into even something bigger. The trajectory conversation you didn't have in March turns into a Q4 where you didn't get considered for the promotion. The peer conversation you didn't have in April turns into a reputation problem by the fall. The performance conversation you didn't have in May turns into a mid-year review where you had to write things you should have been saying all along. And the skip level conversation you didn't have in June turns into a year-end review where the person deciding your compensation doesn't have a clear picture of your work. Every avoided conversation is a cost you're paying in delay, in perception, and in options. The audit services the one you've been avoiding. The action step isn't to have the conversation this week. So that hopefully puts your mind at ease. The action step is to name the pattern, to name what is happening, to write it down, to say it to yourself in clear language. This is the conversation I haven't been having. This is what I've been telling myself about it, and this is what it's costing me. Once you can see it, it becomes easier to schedule. And I encourage you to schedule it before the end of August. So you might be wondering, how do I turn this audit, these 4 questions, into action? So you have your answers to your 4 questions, and you might be wondering, what now? Here's the failure mode I want you to avoid. You listen to the episode, you think about the questions, you feel some clarity, and then by September, you haven't done anything with it. That isn't an audit. That's a moment of reflection that dissolves into nothing. The audit becomes action when you translate each answer into one specific commitment for August. That means next month. Question 1, what have you accomplished that your manager doesn't know about? Becomes, I'll surface this category of work in my next one-on-one using this specific language on this particular date. Question 2, where have you been playing small? Becomes, I'll take this one small action in this specific area by this particular date, and I'll do it 3 times before September. Question 3, what have you outgrown? Becomes, I'll have this specific conversation with my manager about what I should be doing instead. And I'll have this specific handoff conversation with this particular person by this date. That's question 3. So here's question 4. Question 4, which is, what conversation have you been avoiding? Becomes, I'll schedule this specific conversation with this particular person by this specific week in August. 4 questions, 4 commitments, 4 dates. That is what you have to have by the time you have completed your audit, because that's the audit becoming action. It isn't a framework you can put on a slide. It's a set of specific promises you make to yourself in August that determine what your Q4 will look like. Before I end today's episode, here's what's coming next month, because everything I'm releasing in August builds on what you heard today. Next Thursday, I'm doing a deep dive on how to negotiate what you're worth without softening or over-explaining. That episode is the direct application of question 1. If your audit surfaced a category of work that has been invisible and undercompensated. The week after that, I'm talking about what to do when you get passed over for a promotion. That episode is for the leaders whose Q3 decisions didn't land the way they had hoped and who needs a specific playbook for what happens next. And the week after that, I'm walking through how to show up in your first 30 days with a new manager, because reorganizations finalize in September and October, and the women who navigate that transition well are the ones who are thought about before it happens. And I'm closing August with an episode on how to influence peers who aren't your direct reports. That means they are not on your team, but you still have the ability to influence them, because horizontal leadership is where you might be getting stuck and no one is teaching you how to do it well. These 4 episodes in August are the answers you need to the questions this episode raised. Do the audit this week, then do the work in August. One more thing before I close the preview. If you're already thinking about August and toward the Q4 promotion conversation itself, go back to episode 114, How to Get Promoted in Q4, the Strategic Rise Method. That episode is my most downloaded, most listened to Q4 promotion playbook, and it pairs directly with the audit we talked about today. The audit helps you get clarity. The Rise framework gets you positioned. So those 2 together are the July to November arc that you need. Here's your action step from this episode, my friend. Block 30 minutes on your calendar this week, not tonight when you're tired, not Friday when you're wrapping up the week. Block a real 30 minutes when you're clear. Open a document, answer the questions. What have you accomplished this year that your manager doesn't know about? Where have you been playing small? What have you outgrown? And finally, what conversation have you been avoiding? Don't answer them fast. Sit with them. Let the real answers percolate, come up, not the acceptable ones. Then at the end, write down your 4 commitments, 1 for each question with specific language, a specific person, and the specific date. That's your audit. That is how you close off July and start your August strong. And if you do the audit and you look at your answers and you think, I know that I need to do this, and I don't know how to actually do it, or I can see the conversation I need to have, but I'm not sure how to open. Or you might even be thinking, I've been playing small for so long that I don't know what showing up in a big way actually looks like. That's exactly what a leadership strategy call is for. It's a free 30-minute conversation with me where I do this audit with you in real time. And we build the plan for your Q4 so that you know exactly what it needs to look like. Let's talk about where you are, where you want to go, and what it will take to get you there. The link to book your free call is in the show notes. Book the call, do it this week while your audit is still fresh in your mind. And this, my friend, is a wrap. That's your episode. And keep in mind that the women who move up in Q4 do the audit in August. The women who don't, guess what? Don't get promoted. Which one are you going to be? Monday Momentum lands in a few days, and I'll be back next Thursday with a negotiation deep dive. Until next Monday, my friend, I am Kele, reminding you that great communication is the foundation of inspiring leadership. Keep learning, keep growing, and remember to communicate to lead.